Hans Steininger, 1567. Hans Steininger was a 16th century Austrian man with a beard so impressive it practically had an infamous reputation. His beard was over 4 feet long and probably had its own zip code. His whiskers were the talk of the town and were his source of pride. The only problem was that his glorious facial hair ended up being the culprit in his bizarre and tragic death in 1567. Steininger usually kept his enormous beard neatly tucked away in a pouch, letting him move around without tripping over it or tangling it up in random obstacles, because things get tricky when your beard could double as a medieval lasso. But on one fateful day, he let his beard flow freely, like the Rapunzel of Brunel. That was his biggest mistake. As luck would have it, that was the day a fire broke out in Brunel. The townspeople were in chaos, scrambling to get to safety, and in the mayhem, Steininger was rushing around too. But with his majestic beard flowing freely, Hans stepped on it and planted his face on the floor. As he stumbled, Steininger's bad fall broke his neck. It was a tragic end, made all the more unfortunate because a natural disaster, plague, or some other 16th century misfortune did not fall on him. Instead, he was killed by his own incredible facial hair. The Boston Molasses Disaster, 1919. It's 1919 in Boston, just another chilly January day. But in the North End, things were about to get literally sticky. On January 15th, the Boston Molasses disaster turned the bustling neighborhood into a dangerously gooey nightmare. Towering over Commercial Street was a huge steel tank holding 2.3 million gallons of molasses. This wasn't just any molasses, but was the thick, sweet stuff used to make industrial alcohol for weapons and products. It was the kind of molasses that would slow down anyone's day. The Purity Distilling Company had this molasses tank in place, but it was poorly constructed and under constant pressure, literally bursting at the seams. Locals had even seen the tank leak before, but the company just painted it brown to hide the sticky evidence. Because if there's one thing that solves structural flaws, it's a fresh coat of paint. So on this chilly day, something snapped. Around lunchtime, a massive rumble shook the area and the tank exploded. A 15-foot wave of molasses rushed through the streets at 35 miles per hour, and it wasn't the kind of wave you could surf your way through. Imagine a wall of syrup moving as fast as a car. Buildings were crushed, cars were tossed, and anyone caught in its path was trapped in a sticky, terrifying mess. Tragically, 21 people lost their lives, and over 150 were injured. Rescue efforts were a nightmare because molasses is incredibly thick, so pulling people out was like trying to unstick a fly from honey. In the disaster's aftermath, the neighborhood was coated in molasses, and cleanup took months. Boston residents claimed the smell of molasses lingered for decades afterward, a sickly sweet reminder of the disaster. So if you ever catch a whiff of molasses in Boston, you might just be smelling the ghosts of 1919. The Great Whiskey Fire of Dublin, 1875. It's a quiet October night in Dublin, Ireland in 1875, and you're having a few drinks in a pub with some of your friends. Life was good because you had enough booze to keep you warm, as there was a huge whiskey reserve in a local warehouse. After all, whiskey is basically an Irish heating system. But that wasn't the case. It all went to hell when a fire sparked in Malone's Malt House, right near the Liberties, a working-class neighborhood known for its breweries and distilleries. As flames took hold, they reached thousands of barrels of whiskey stored in the warehouse. The blaze quickly became less of a fire and more of a whiskey flood of apocalyptic proportions. Whiskey is flammable on any given day, but imagine rivers of the stuff gushing out of the burning warehouse, the air thick with the scent of smoky spirits. Meanwhile, the streets turned into a river of flaming whiskey that looked like it came from the depths of the underworld. Only instead of souls, it was cobblestones and storefronts that were getting scorched. While most people with any sense tried to flee, some locals had other priorities. In true Irish fashion, a handful of people saw this as an opportunity to scoop up some free whiskey, grabbing pots and pans and even cupping their hands to salvage what they could. After all, Ireland isn't exactly known for having light drinkers. Unfortunately, the taste of free came at a high cost. The fire scorched no one, but several people met their end from alcohol poisoning after drinking the blazing hot whiskey right out of the streets. It was a free-for-all that quickly became the worst bar crawl in Dublin's history. By the time firefighters managed to contain the blaze, it had caused extensive damage to the neighborhood, destroying several buildings and forcing authorities to rethink how they stored such flammable goods. 13 people lost their lives that night, not to the flames, but to their determination to never leave a drop behind. Robert Williams, 1979. Imagine a future where robots start taking over the world and killing everyone. But that already happened before, at least to a certain degree. Just ask Robert Williams, who died in 1979 after becoming the first person to be killed by a robot. But this wasn't a case of Will Smith running away from killer robots hell-bent on eliminating mankind. Instead, Williams was working at a Ford Motor Company plant in Michigan. Part of his job involved retrieving castings from a high shelf. Ford had recently introduced a large robotic arm to assist with this task. But as it turned out, the robot wasn't exactly user-friendly. It certainly was not error-free. As Williams learned the hard way, things have turned dark when the helpful machine suddenly becomes an oversized game of whack-a-mole with you as the mole. One day, when the robot arm failed to retrieve parts as fast as Williams needed, he climbed up to get them manually. The robot's arm, however, wasn't done for the day. Moving without warning, it swung over and struck him on the head with a force so intense it was instantly fatal. No one had anticipated a robot moving in this seemingly random, dangerous way. It turns out that while robots don't take coffee breaks, they still know how to break something else. Following Williams' death, his family took Ford to court, arguing that the robot lacked adequate safety measures. In a historic decision, the court agreed, finding Ford liable and awarding the family $10 million in damages. George Spencer Mallette, 1909. George Spencer Mallette might hold the title for the most unfortunate birthday in history. Ironically, this tragedy began as a well-intentioned surprise from his coworkers, who wanted to make his birthday extra special, a gesture that, in hindsight, was only special in the worst possible way. Instead of George getting birthday greetings, his family members were receiving condolences. At just 15, George worked as an office boy. He must have had a bit of that teenage riz, because the guys over at the office wanted to celebrate his birthday by turning him into a man. They hired women with questionable virtues to shower him with kisses. This was meant to be a teenage dream come true. Except for George, it quickly turned into a rather embarrassing nightmare. As he found himself surrounded by overly enthusiastic women, George tried his best to play it cool, but things went south quickly. At some point, it became a chaotic, lipstick-smearing horror show. The women only stopped after hearing him say the words, "I'm stabbed." Amid the kissing chaos, blood started to pour from poor George, and it quickly became clear that something had gone wrong. The horrified girls rushed him to the hospital, but the injury was fatal. It turned out George had an ink eraser, the old-school type with a sharp metal point, hidden in his pocket the entire time. The woman probably thought, "Is that an ink eraser in your pocket, or are you just happy to see me?" The eraser jabbed right into his heart when he was kissed so enthusiastically that he stumbled forward. That's not exactly a romantic drama movie ending. George Spencer Mallette's gravestone reads, "Stabbed to death." Apparently, the family decided that kissed to death would have been too embarrassing to memorialize on his epitaph. Isidora Duncan, 1927. You've heard the phrase "dressed to kill" before. However, Isidora Duncan's fashion statement took that saying to a different level, and what she didn't know was that she was wearing a literal killer accessory. Duncan was a celebrated dancer and pioneer of modern dance, known for her flowing scarves and free-spirited, graceful style. She was a true fashion icon. Unfortunately, her scarves seemed to have a dangerous case of unrequited love for her, because while she adored them, they turned out to have some rather lethal affection for her in return. On a fateful day in 1927 in France, Duncan decided to go for a drive in an open-air convertible. As always, she was dressed in true Isidora fashion, with one of her signature, extra-long silk scarves fluttering dramatically behind her. These scarves were her trademark, embodying her free spirit and unique style, practically dancing in the wind as she moved. But this was one dance move no one wanted to see. As the car started moving, her scarf caught on one of the wheels. Since it was wrapped tightly around her neck, it tightened with the wheel's rotation, pulling her out of the car with brutal force. In a tragic twist, the accessory symbolizing her liberated style was her downfall. This shocking event caused her to break her neck, leading to almost instant death. It was a cruelly ironic end for someone who spent her life pursuing freedom, movement, and beauty. Once a symbol of her unique elegance, that scarf ultimately had its own deadly grip on her fate, an eerie reminder that sometimes fashion can be to die for. King Adolf Frederick of Sweden, 1771. It's the 18th century, and you're a chef working for King Adolf Frederick of Sweden. This king isn't a simple food-loving monarch. Instead, he was the original food influencer of the 1700s, because he was fond of truly kingly meals. But what neither of you know is that the food you're about to serve is going to be a legendary dinner for all the wrong reasons. King Adolf had a particular fondness for a rich Swedish dessert called semla. Now, semla is a fluffy wheat bun filled with almond paste and topped with whipped cream, often enjoyed with warm milk. But Adolf Frederick decided to go all in for this particular meal, like a gambler with a dessert addiction. In addition to lobster, caviar, sauerkraut, smoked herring, and champagne, he indulged in 14 servings of semla, because he was the king and he could eat as much dessert as he wanted without his mother telling him no. At first, it was a meal fit for a king, but as the story goes, it turned out to be too much of a good thing. After downing that massive feast, he started to feel unwell. Heavy foods are fine until they're plotting a revolt in your stomach, and unfortunately, Adolf's last great conquest was an ill-fated feast. His body couldn't handle the sheer volume or richness of it all. What he experienced was, by today's standards, a combination of digestive complications and what might be called extreme food regret. But medical science back then was a bit like calling in a fortune teller for stomach troubles, because the royal physicians couldn't save him, and so he passed away that evening, achieving what would later be known as the most royal food coma in history. Franz Reichelt, 1912. In 1912, one man dreamed of flying, but that dream turned into a nightmare faster than you can say splat. Franz Reichelt was a French tailor and parachute enthusiast, wanting to revolutionize the world of personal flight, believing people would one day be able to fly without airplanes, just 9 years after the Wright brothers' first successful flight. So he designed a parachute suit, a wearable device meant to save aviators in case they needed to jump out of an aircraft. Think of it as a heavy jacket with a built-in parachute, though it was more like a large, unwieldy bat suit, minus the comic book heroics. His goal was to prove that his invention could glide a person safely down from heights. But the reality was that gravity had other plans for him. Reichelt set up a public demonstration at the Eiffel Tower to make a grand statement, inviting the press and curious spectators to witness his groundbreaking, or ground-hitting, invention. Initially, he told people he'd use a dummy for the test, but when the day came, he decided to put his life on the line to prove his confidence in the suit. His confidence was admirable, but may have crossed the line between bravery and being a literal dummy. On the morning of February 4th, 1912, Reichelt climbed up the Eiffel Tower in his parachute suit, despite concerned onlookers urging him to reconsider. He stood about 187 feet from the ground, adjusted his outfit, and took the fateful leap. Unfortunately, the suit was more a fashion disaster than a lifesaver. Instead of gliding or even slowing down, the suit barely deployed, making his descent look less like a graceful flight and more like a tragic cartoon anvil drop. He's now remembered as the Flying Tailor. The only problem is that he never actually flew. Instead, he quite literally fell flat. Gary Hoy, 1993. There aren't many people willing to shift careers from being a lawyer to a stuntman. Unfortunately, a lawyer named Gary Hoy did a stunt one too many times, leading to one of the most surprising freak accidents in recent history. While most lawyers break cases, Hoy had a knack for testing things that don't break. Hoy was a Toronto-based lawyer who worked in a high-rise building, and he had a flair for theatrics that could make even courtroom drama seem dull. Known for his sense of humor and enthusiasm, he would often pull a dramatic stunt to demonstrate the durability of the building's windows by running into them and proving they were unbreakable. He did that many times in the past to prove his point. Each time the glass would tremble like a nervous intern, but wouldn't break, leaving everyone impressed and questioning both the window's strength and Hoy's sanity. But unbreakable doesn't mean unshakable. In July 1993, Hoy was hosting a group of students and decided to impress them with his unbreakable window demonstration. But on this particular day, things went wrong. Armed with confidence and a very loose understanding of structural engineering, Hoy charged at the window to deliver his signature performance. To everyone's shock, the glass didn't shatter. It held as Hoy had always promised, but the entire window pane popped out of its frame in a freak occurrence. Hoy, still pressing against it, was carried out along with the glass. His demonstration took an unexpected dive as he fell 24 stories down to his death. Technically, Hoy wasn't wrong. The glass didn't break, but it wasn't designed to take countless bumps from a grown adult running at full speed like a human bowling ball. Faulty installation and dozens of Hoy's patented demonstrations eventually damaged the window pane enough that it couldn't stay in place anymore. Jennifer Strange, 2007. Let's say you're Jennifer Strange, and you see an opportunity to make your 3 kids happy. You join a radio station contest called Hold Your Wii for a Wii, where you're encouraged to drink a lot of water without going to the bathroom. The prize is a Nintendo Wii, the hottest gaming console at the time. You think it's just a little hydration with high stakes, but this seemingly harmless contest quickly became a biology lesson no one signed up for. The contest's mechanics were simple. You were given bottles of water to drink every 15 minutes, with the requirement that you couldn't use the restroom. Jennifer reportedly drank nearly 2 gallons of water in a short period. Apparently, the organizers didn't consider that water, in large enough quantities, isn't just refreshing, but is more like the silent assassin of the hydration world. Your body needs a balanced amount of electrolytes, like sodium, to function properly. Drinking too much water too quickly dilutes the blood sodium levels, leading to swelling in the body's cells. When brain cells start swelling, it's not exactly the peaceful Zen expansion you imagine. Instead, pressure can build inside the skull, which can cause confusion, seizures, coma, and unfortunately can be fatal. Jennifer began feeling sick shortly after the contest, and even mentioned her discomfort during the event, but the seriousness of her condition wasn't recognized. Sadly, she passed away later that day due to water intoxication. Instead of handing out a free console worth a few $100, the radio station faced a lawsuit, with the jury awarding Jennifer's family over $16 million for negligence. Seagard the Mighty, 892. It's the 9th century, and Seagard the Mighty thinks he's mighty enough that no one could ever beat him in a fight. But his immune system begged to differ, because not even the mightiest warrior can outmuscle germs. Seagard challenged and defeated Mallette, a rival Viking chieftain. With the swagger only a victorious Viking could muster, Seagard took Mallette's head as a trophy, fastening it to his saddle like a grim Viking hood ornament, because nothing says "I won" like a bit of head decor. As Seagard was riding back, feeling he was on top of the world, the severed head of Mallette's head decided it wasn't done with the Viking just yet. Bouncing around on the saddle, the head managed one last bite of revenge when one of his teeth grazed Seagard's leg, puncturing his skin. That's the universe saying he should have probably left that head at home. Given the medieval setting, let's just say the wound wasn't exactly cleaned with hand sanitizer. The infection quickly set in, and in a tragic twist, this tiny scratch led to Seagard's death, killed by the very head of the man he had just defeated. It's the ultimate in Viking karma, where Seagard's prize turned around and literally came back to bite him.